So the University of Edinburgh recognised that there were some important lessons we needed to learn from studying our past, some uncomfortable things that we needed to confront. And we wanted it to be academically led by some of our own experts. We wanted it to be detailed, we wanted it to be comprehensive.
This university has been here a long time, and therefore I think it's wonderful that this university has realised its history and has decided that a review of its links with, slavery, racism, and colonialism applies to it as well.
This report takes a different step. It's trying to hold the university and its history accountable to how different communities see themselves reflected, and not only what's taught, but who's doing the teaching. So there's a real investment, I think, in how communities want to see themselves reflected in a national university in Scotland. Scotland's becoming more and more diverse. It's increased its racial and ethnic diversity every year. Every census tells us that. We should be responsible. We should show that we definitely reflect and have an interest in reflecting all types of knowledge from across the world, especially that is present here in Scotland.
Part of this project is about thinking about how the past continues to affect us today in terms of racial structures. So we've been really keen to join the dots between past and present. So we've had two research fellows who have been looking at, one of them's been looking at the history and legacies of African enslavement. That's not just looking at financial legacies. That's something that a lot of other institutions have done. We have done that, but actually it becomes really difficult to put a final figure. You can't, it's impossible. But we've also been looking at, within that history of enslavement, the circulations of knowledge, of racialized forms of knowledge, knowledge extraction from the colonies. And then we've had another research fellow looking at the history and legacies of colonialism, and he's been investigating things like the development of racialized forms of thinking, of racial hierarchies, particularly in relation to the Enlightenment, but also thinking a little bit about the university's connections to the East India Company, which were, again, extremely strong. So we've also been looking at the kind of data that the university collects in terms of its racial and ethnic minorities, and thinking about, is that data adequate? What does it tell us about pay gaps? What does it tell us about the representation of particular communities? And actually, there's a really stark underrepresentation of Black communities in particular. And then we've also had two academics who more recently have come on board, and they've been looking at the links between the institution and Israel and Palestine, recognising that Arthur Balfour, our former Chancellor, was also the author of the Balfour Declaration. So that, in a nutshell, is the kind of breadth and depth we've been able to go into, but there is so much more.
I was asked to chair something called the policy group within the Race Review, which sat alongside what we've always considered to be the main report where the historical findings and the deep research took place. Mainly to make sure that we could consider in advance, not waiting until the findings came out, but be ready so that executive could take decisions to move really quite quickly in some areas where we felt we should make important progress.
We have fundamentally changed what we have understood the Scottish Enlightenment to be. We have shown that there are legacies of discrimination that we still have to correct. This is a level of self-reflection that I think very few institutions have had the courage to truly embark on. We have to really focus on the idea that it's not just a few select individuals at the university that hold racist beliefs, that the university built part of its legacy and prestige on scholars who wanted to understand why Black people were the least intelligent, why Black people were the least moral, why Black people were the least beautiful in some writings. That idea, that intellectual curiosity that sustained the University of Edinburgh for so long, created students who were passionate to give money back to continue with that train of thought. So there was an investment by alum and students to keep racism alive, so to speak.
There's been some really outstanding research undertaken by the two historians involved. It makes a difficult read in many places. So, of course, there's a lot to reflect on in terms of how we're going to address and redress many of these issues. But it should also be a learning experience for everybody. And there's some really outstanding research to base that on.
As an intellectual, it gives me a lot to think about, new connections, new ideas, new paths of research. As a Black person, it makes me even sadder because it suggests that this view of anti-Blackness was not localized to the horrible history of slavery and the small-mindedness of white Americans, but in fact something that was shared and actually thought to be a product of the Scottish Enlightenment.
The the university is in the business of producing knowledge. So how can it now be in the business of producing decolonized forms of knowledge that genuinely embrace and include those communities within the way that it thinks, acts, and is structured?
I hope this review sets a standard by which institutions can transform not only their historical perspective on their legacies, but actually transform the institutional culture.
The review set high standards in terms of community engagement and importantly around the principles and the ethos of how that was approached. And it goes without saying that that will be continued as we respond to this body of work, and we will be centering the voices and the experience and the knowledge of Black and global majority members of our community. The review is a really important stage along the journey for the University of Edinburgh's aspiration to be an anti-racist organisation. What's meant by that is the opposite of being racist is not just not being racist, it's anti-racism. And with that, there's some key principles which are around things like self-accountability, critical self-reflection, and ongoing commitments to learning and unlearning.
The findings have been reported to the executive. It was the executive which commissioned the review under my chairmanship. So the executive has now seen the report, had an opportunity to study them. We've formed a group to take the response forward so that we can understand what are the immediate priorities, what can we do straight away, what's going to take a bit longer, what's going to require fundraising.
Looking ahead, I really hope the whole university community will engage with the report, and all of the recommendations are based on not closing down discussions, but opening up new, important discussions. If universities are for one thing, they're for holding open discussion and debate on difficult issues just such as these, and we really hope that this is a beginning, if you like, rather than an end.
I'd like people to recognise that the University of Edinburgh has the courage to face its past. We're proud of many things in our past, but we're also needing to learn lessons from some things we're not so proud of.
So the past is not just the past. It has consequences. The public expects an educational institution to tell them the truth. I can assure them that every effort has been made, that the truth has been told.